So I put out a video last week about how I reset this culture. I took the erratic looking worms out and I turned an unstable situation into a very stable culture. The worms are being fed slightly different, it seems. And I actually put in a marine pure ball for a different reason other than biological filtration. I'm going to give this culture a pellet. These are the carnivore sinking pellets. And normally I fed these before. The worms go absolutely insane for these pellets. They are all over them the minute I drop them in. This is the normal reaction that I see when I drop a high protein pellet in. But this is what I'm seeing now. If you notice, all of the worms are not even caring that the pellet is in the tank with them. And actually, their heads aren't even pointed in that direction. If you notice, there's only a couple worms that even have their heads pointed out. The rest of them are their tails pointed up. Their heads are in the substrate. They could care less if a pellet is in there or not. There's one new thing that I did with this. When I did the two-part reset, I incorporated the microbial loop that they need to have a successful culture. And I've been hinting towards that mome is the key, but it looks like it may be the microbes, not really the mome. Here's a couple minutes later, and there's only one or two worms that even have their heads out and are actually biting the pellet. I've mentioned in past videos that when you're feeding your blackworms, you're not just feeding your blackworms, you're feeding an entire ecosystem. You're feeding the entire microbial loop. The amount of microbes is the only difference between what we saw previously with them eating pellets and what they're dealing with now. There is a tremendous amount of microbes. And even a few minutes later, once the snails come over and start eating, there's only 3 worms that are taking bites out of that pellet. The snails, I think, ate more of that pellet than the worms did. So I made another video. I put all of my notes into my new notebook app, and I hope I can explain it for you this way.
Welcome back, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because, well, we're going to completely flip the script on how we think about failing aquatic systems. I mean, if you've ever tried to cultivate a thriving, stable aquatic setup, you know firsthand how unbelievably frustrating it is when things just crash for no obvious reason. Today, we're zooming in on a really specific, completely fascinating case study to solve this exact problem, the notoriously finicky blackworm culture. We're not just going to talk about how to keep a few worms alive, we are going to unlock the microscopic engine that literally drives their survival. Okay, let's dive into this. Blackworms are incredibly popular, right? They're this phenomenally nutritious live food, packed with easily digestible protein, and they trigger a fantastic natural hunting response in fish and amphibians. But despite all that popularity, there's a glaring mystery in the aquatic community. Why do so many at-home and small-scale blackworm cultures just mysteriously crash? You do everything right, you do your routine feeding, you maintain the water, and then suddenly, practically overnight, the water turns cloudy, the whole thing smells absolutely foul, and the system collapses. So what is actually going wrong here? To answer that, we have to completely reframe our perspective. The fundamental trap we all fall into is thinking we're just feeding worms. Actually, scratch that. The paradigm shift we really need to embrace today is that we are managing a highly complex microbial aquatic compost ecosystem. The blackworms, they're honestly just the happy byproduct of a healthy compost engine. When your culture crashes, it's not because you failed the worms, it's because you completely lost control of the microbes. So, here is our game plan for this explainer to rescue these systems. First, we'll tackle the sterile lab myth. Second, the anatomy of a culture crash. Third, stage 1, anaerobic denitrification. Fourth, stage 2, rebuilding biofloc. And finally, we'll look at the ultimate biological proof. Let's jump into section 1, the sterile lab myth, why cleanliness kills. Let's talk about why our total obsession with cleanliness might actually be the exact thing killing our aquatic systems. You see, much of the standard textbook literature on culturing is based on observations made in highly sanitized, sterile environments. But what's really interesting here is that a sterile setup completely lacks a bioactive layer. When people try to house blackworms in just water and bare glass, there is zero mulm, detritus, or organic matter. And without those microbes, when you drop a high-protein feed directly into the water, it just doesn't get processed. Instead, it breaks down into toxic ammonia, massively stresses the worms, and kills them. Sterile conditions quite literally give us incorrect results because these animals absolutely cannot survive without that microbial bioload. Moving on to section 2, Anatomy of a culture crash, when good systems go bad. If we know we need microbes, what physically happens inside a system when it goes completely off the rails? Let's dissect the anatomy of a crash. Now, to understand a crash, you first have to understand what a healthy system is built on, and that is biofloc technology, or BFT. This isn't just mud at the bottom of a tank. Biofloc is an active, living layer of heterotrophic bacteria, algae, fungi, and detritus, what we often call MOM. In a perfectly balanced system, this living layer is essentially a 60% crude protein microbial engine. It acts as an incredible slow-release food source. It digests the toxic nitrogen waste in the water and converts it directly into edible bacterial biomass. But here is exactly where the crash happens. We naturally want more worms, right? So we add more food, a lot of it. But high, continuous inputs of food, while they definitely speed up worm reproduction, they also drive massive, rapid microbial growth. All those newly multiplying bacteria suddenly require a ton of oxygen. Eventually, your system hits this critical threshold where the microbial oxygen demand skyrockets, the substrate gets completely exhausted, and the biological filtration just collapses under the weight of its own success. The water turns toxic, and boom, the system crashes. Which brings us to our fix. Section 3, Stage 1, Anaerobic Denitrification, which is our reset phase. So your culture has crashed. It smells terrible, it looks gross, and honestly, most people would just dump it down the drain and start over. But we aren't gonna do that. I want you to completely reframe how you view that frustrating bucket of cloudy water. The crash is not the end of your culture. Biologically speaking, it is the absolute critical starting point for our reset. That cloudy, unstable decomposition phase, that is exactly where the raw materials for a fresh, thriving ecosystem are forged. We just have to step in and guide it by manipulating the nitrogen cycle. Our rescue mission is a very methodical, 3-step procedure. We've already diagnosed the crash. We know the microbial oxygen demand outpaced the system, and toxic metabolites have built up because the carbon source is gone. So now we execute the Stage 1 reset by counterintuitively turning the air completely off. And then we'll follow up with the Stage 2 rebuild by turning the air back on. Let's get into the specifics of Stage 1, because it sounds totally crazy at first. You take your crashed tank, and you literally turn off all the aeration. We are intentionally creating a stagnant, zero-oxygen slime bucket. Next, you macrodose heavy amounts of molasses. Why molasses? Because it is pure, readily available organic carbon. In these high-nitrogen, highly toxic environments, the beneficial heterotrophic bacteria are absolutely starved for carbon. By cutting the air and overwhelming the system with molasses, you force these bacteria into an anaerobic denitrification process. They will literally scrub the waste right out of the water, converting toxic nitrates into harmless nitrogen gas. You just wait until your water tests show your nitrates have hit absolute zero. And here is the brilliant bonus of this zero oxygen stage. Aquatic earthworms have a survival mechanism where, if oxygen drops, they are biologically forced to migrate straight up to the water's surface to breathe. This means you can simply scoop them off the top to harvest them. You completely bypass the old, destructive method of pouring your culture through a net and violently washing away all that precious mold you worked so hard to build. Once that's done, we move to Section 4, Stage 2, Rebuilding Biofloc, the infinite loop. Now that we've cleared out the toxic waste in Stage 1, we transition from emergency waste removal to building an infinite food source in Stage 2. First things first, turn the aeration back on to heavily oxygenate the system. Now, we introduce a dual feed. We dose a little high-protein fish feed to provide nitrogen building blocks, right alongside continued doses of molasses for carbon. We are intentionally maintaining a high carbon-to-nitrogen ratio. This process brilliantly illustrates the true power of biofloc technology. By balancing that ratio, you trigger the bacteria to rapidly overproduce a thick, fresh, 60% crude protein microbial slime right down in the substrate. Instead of constantly throwing away exhausted substrate, like peat moss, and replacing it, you are establishing an infinite reuse loop. You are literally recycling dead dirt and toxic nitrogen metabolites straight back into highly nutritious, completely edible biofloc. And that brings us to Section 5, the ultimate biological proof, observing the truth. You know, it's one thing to talk about the theory of high carbon to nitrogen ratios and heterotrophic bacteria, but it's another entirely to see the animals themselves validate the science. When you implement this exact 2-stage reset, you get an incredible aha moment. We actually have an observation from a culturist who noted this exact phenomenon. When reintroduced, the worms ignore direct protein pellets, settle head down in the substrate, and constantly produce castings, proving the microbial biomass is their true food. I mean, just think about that for a second. You can drop expensive, highly formulated fish food right into the tank, and the worms will literally walk right past it to eat the microbial slime we just engineered with nothing but some molasses and air. So the crucial point we really want you to take away is this. Blackworms have two ways to feed. You can try direct feeding, dropping in pellets or organic matter. And sure, yes, it gives them fast energy, but it so easily causes an imbalance, leading right back to a crash. On the other flip side, we have microbial feeding. You feed the microbes with carbon, and the microbes feed the worms. This provides stable energy, it feeds the worms continuously 24/7 without them even having to search for it, and it builds an incredibly robust, crash-resistant system. And nature actually has a beautiful way of keeping this entire engine running. It's a concept known as the anti-lockbox bioturbation rule. You might be wondering, well, won't all this heavy microbial feeding cause the sediment to just compact into a solid, suffocating brick? Actually, no. Because as the dense population of blackworms gorges on this microbial layer, they are physically plowing through the sediment. This constant bioturbation continuously churns and oxygenates the substrate, making sure the bacteria deep down get all the oxygen they need to keep recycling waste into food. It is literally biological filtration that simultaneously produces a continuous, infinite food supply. We've seen how resetting the microbial loop can take a crashed, foul-smelling bucket and turn it into a self-sustaining, infinite food engine. But I want to leave you with this final thought today. If managing the microbial loop with something as incredibly simple as manipulating air and adding molasses is the secret to an infinite blackworm culture, how could biofloc technology rescue your other failing aquatic systems? I mean, what other environments are you treating as sterile habitats right now when you really should be managing them as thriving, microscopic compost engines? It's like a giant puzzle. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you on the next explainer.
I hope that explains exactly what we're
Well,
seeing in how the worms are acting with the pellets this time. It's just more proof that the microbial loop is the key to a successful blackworm culture.